It is my pleasure to welcome you to Something to Talk About today with David Harrison. We're going to be doing our regular monthly politics discussion, and there's certainly a lot to talk about today. I want to mention that our program is sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which offers memory care, and they're building assisted living and independent living upon Rolling Bay. They also have day stay and respite programs. To learn more, call 360-689-4314 today. Also, we'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathering on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived on these waters of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We are grateful for their stewardship, for their hospitality, and we honor them. David, thank you as always for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you to all of you. And I want to do a little sidebar with you on what's happening today. And then we'll go on to our three topics. And as you know, we'll stop after each. And the three topics are a postmortem on what happened with the debt ceiling and what it all means. The second is how the presidential thing is sweeping up, especially is happening as especially on the Republican side. And then I want to do a discussion of the Senate next time, which is especially scary for us. So let's talk for a minute about, as some of you know, a lot of you know, rather than waiting till next week, they have pulled off the seal on the indictment and given us 43 pages of detail. And you just have to know that somebody would have to work really, really hard to get indicted on this. The Republicans can talk all they want about weaponization. This is anti-weaponization. What happened is Trump has just gotten so used to lying that he just decided he could lie to anyone. And so the whole indictment unsealed is filled with him telling people to move boxes and bring him boxes and not tell other people that he has boxes, and showing them files and telling them that he shouldn't show it to them. And it's just bizarre. And it's just a man who no one ever told that he had to follow some sort of minimal rules. So you know, the idea that somehow that Jack Smith was eager to do this is absurd. Basically, he didn't have any choice. But as you know, this is filled with false statements and a very scary divulging of our possible plans to attack Iran. In that case, it had to do with Trump having his feelings hurt because somebody had accused him of wanting such a thing. So he was just trying to show that actually a writer that he was that it wasn't him, but he ended up divulging classified material. In another case where he shows a staff member. At any rate, this is serious stuff. You know, this case is not going to get dismissed, but as you know, it's not going to be the only indictment. I think it's pretty clear that there'll be at least two more. And first, Fani Willis, and that grand jury's already completed. Fani Willis has said in the first 3 weeks of August, they'll be making their decision. I think clearly he'll be indicted, and Giuliani will be indicted for election fraud in Georgia. And the issue will just be whether there's a RICO conspiracy charge beyond that. But I think there's no question there'll be an indictment there. And I think there'll be an election indictment at the federal level from the special counsel too. And that's enough for me. I've felt for some time that there will not be an indictment over the insurrection itself because Donald Trump didn't say go inside the Capitol beat up police officers, even though he wanted that. So I think that's good enough. We'll get into it later on in the discussion, but I think it's good enough for DeSantis and others to do what they had planned to do all along, not to say that the charges are just and that Trump deserved it, but to say that they're so distracting as to make it impossible for Trump to advance his candidacy. That's what everybody's in thinking is going to happen, and I think they're right. I think that is going to happen. We get all tied up in knots as to whether something is good for Trump and his base and this and that. I promise you, over time, it's never a good thing to have your posterior hauled into federal court and have an indictment of this serious nature. So we can say more today if you want, but that it's worth reading. You can download it and read it yourself, but it's out there today. Questions or thoughts on this quick sidebar? We always expected this would be the next indictment, and we are not surprised. But I think it's good to read it because you will see that he did everything wrong. He just threw error after error after error, lie after lie, false claim against false claim. Like there's no, I mean, and astonishing things where there's now discovered video of them moving boxes from here to there, and the musical chairs of where boxes were going, and the clear representation that these were the boxes that needed to be searched when they were hiding boxes at least 2 other locations. In the indictment, the pictures of the boxes alone are, I mean, that's worse than my closet. It's just awful. Anything on this before we go on to the debt limit?
Rita.
He's not going to walk away. So don't, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that he's permanently wounded. Yes.
So I was wondering, it looks like the judge that they drew on this is the same gal that was the same judge that he'd had earlier, and she got some of her stuff was overturned in an appeals court. It looks like she's the judge for this trial. So I just wondered what you had any thoughts about that.
Melissa was mentioning that it's something because she's a person that basically gave the FBI no standing and set up an extraordinary sorting process that at least implied that the government had no special claim. And she got roundly and soundly overturned at the appellate level.
Right.
I don't know, I haven't checked what the rules are for how, there she is. It's an awful thing, but I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried that somehow that she's going to stay and do the wrong thing. This is too visible of a case to have us. There's no way to sweep this under the rug. So, but I haven't followed. I don't know what the rules are for recusal or whether this initial assignment. Melissa, did you read anything on how what happens from here on in terms of the assignment?
No, I haven't heard anything. I've just been watching the news so far. I haven't read anything. Reading the news go into more depth, but
So
I
we'll
haven't.
find out.
Yeah, like I said,
fine.
they just said she was going to be the initial judge. So I don't know if that means she's just going to rule on 1 or 2 things. I would think they'd have. Do they have to start with the district court? They can't go right to the.
Yes, absolutely. It's a charge in federal district court.
So it has to start there.
Yeah, well, that's the only trial level. When appellate courts rule, they don't have a separate trial on the merits. They rule.
Okay, so they can't be in.
So it has to be. It has to be at the district level.
I would think Jack Smith would have grounds to have her removed.
Yeah, that's
All you
interesting.
have to do, I don't know if you read her initial report when she sent it to the special master, when she sent the documents there, but she was just so in favor of Trump.
Yeah, it was a surprising ruling, and there was a lot of thinking then that it had no base, it wasn't gonna be. Like, she cost Trump actually 4 or 5 months on this bizarre procedure, but the hell of it is even with her restricted sense of what's classified and what Trump had, he would still have been indicted.
What surprises me is how many people around Trump took pains to record things. They obviously knew he was breaking the law, but it doesn't seem like anybody tried to stop him.
Well, it's as at least one lawyer left that team, so he may have left that team in protest. And this guy who dictated into his iPhone,
Yeah.
he had to be thinking, I better preserve this for history and for my own protection.
Yeah, but he stayed on the case until he had to
That's right.
testify to a grand jury. So
Yeah, that's right. And then that's scary because I was telling Reed when we came on, I once testified before a grand jury trying to get them to do something. And just the fact that it's a grand jury, I was 29, so it got my attention. Let's go on to the debt.
I'm going to let Christina jump in here.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see
Oh, no,
it.
you don't mean to have your hand up. Okay.
No, I do. I just want to say really quickly, it is the charging document was written for the public. Jack Smith obviously wants people to read it. It is not full of legalese. Do what David says, read it. It's actually very entertaining. And that's all I wanted to say.
that's what Jack Smith said during his press conference this morning, was he wants everybody to read the indictment for themselves.
It's very different from the sporting document for Stormy Daniels, which is basically the same thing over and over again, where this is every page is a fresh and exciting new insult to the Constitution. So that's nice. Very, very readable. What can we do to not have the same prototypical debt crisis again? And the answer is nothing. This is based. We're having a debt crisis because of the way the Congress functions, and what we can do to keep from being held hostage 2 years from now is to control all three houses, the Senate, the House, and the presidency. And that's really the only possibility. There's progressives that have argued a couple different things. One, that we could mint $1 trillion coin, and that the executive branch would have the power to do that. Or second, that the 14th Amendment language that says we have to pay our bills means that the limitation on debt is unconstitutional. The problem with both of those arguments, you could pursue the second one, but in the meantime, the markets would drop by 20%, your 401k would go to hell, and the Chinese would get new position with becoming a worldwide currency, none of which we want to happen. So the tools that we use to try and break down the present system are not really available to us. So the good news, of course, of what happened is Biden insisted upon 2 years, and we're kicked now beyond the next election. It means we don't have to go through this next year, which was McCarthy's initial proposal. So there's nothing wrong with that. And there's a huge article in the New York Times, I think it was Sunday, explaining how this was a wonderful set of substantive victories for Biden. That basically, the Biden's team won the detail and gave McCarthy talking points on each issue, but on such issues as the food stamp work requirement and on specific appropriations that Biden's people knew what they were doing. Quite notably in setting up an incentive for the passage of appropriations bills. So basically what it says is that if they don't pass all 12 appropriations bills by January, that the automatic cuts will include a 1% cut in defense spending, which the reason why that's significant is Republicans obviously don't want it. I think the money is there to cut actually, but what happens is that 1% danger disempowers the Freedom Caucus. That is, McCarthy can't get the votes necessary for those 12 appropriations bills to pass the House without some Democratic votes, which Hakeem Jeffries will not give him without compromise on what's in the appropriations bills. So the chance of the Freedom Caucus to hold McCarthy hostage is weakened considerably by that impending 1% danger cut. So that's notable. The reason why McCarthy was able to get any traction at all is he started off by taking Medicare and Social Security off the table. So he limited himself to a very small part, 15% or so of the federal budget. And then he did something that Biden did not expect him to do. He was able to get his caucus, including the alleged moderates, to pass his proposal. Biden's whole, we're not going to negotiate you, and this is a separate issue, which I said was going to happen. I said they'll pass a debt ceiling increase and then a separate bill on cuts. That whole strategy was upset by the fact that McCarthy was able to get enough votes in the House by keeping his entire caucus together to pass a debt reduction bill and a debt ceiling, 1-year debt ceiling increase. So McCarthy did pretty well. He did pretty well given the awful situation he was in, because he didn't want us to be unable to pay. He didn't want government closed down and a subsequent default. And so given that, he didn't have very much leverage, and Biden was intended to him doing okay and having an argument with his caucus. Unfortunately for him, 50 members of his caucus don't agree with the argument. Unfortunately for him, all he has to have to function is a majority of the majority, as long as Hakeem Jeffries will let him do that. So on an issue like this, we made a big deal, Jeffries made a big deal of there being more Democratic votes in both the Senate and the House than Republican votes. But there were a ton of Republican votes. A majority of Republicans, 60, 70%, voted for it. And that's what McCarthy has. He will never advance something where he doesn't have a majority of the majority. What the Freedom Caucus gets to do is now a different sort of thing. Well, they had incredible power when they were naming him, because all the Democrats voted for Jeffries. So he had to get, as you remember, all but 10 or so of these folks to vote him speaker. However, the motion to unseat a speaker is different. And that is, it is true, and he got that concession, Republicans did, that one person can file a motion to vacate the speakership. And you can do that. When it comes to a vote, a majority of the members voting have to vote to unseat McCarthy. So say that were to happen, what would Hakeem Jeffries do? His members would vote present. They're not going to vote to unseat McCarthy. I mean, that would just be bizarre and actually duplicitous. And there'll never be a majority of Republicans who want to unseat McCarthy because they don't have another choice. Scalise is not even as popular as McCarthy is. So now we've got defense spending and farm bill, including food stamps coming up, and the Freedom Caucus, whatever that means, really has no place to go. They know McCarthy's going to do the same thing. That is, do appropriations negotiations where Democrats will pass appropriations bills. He'll get Republicans to play because of the danger of the 1% defense cuts, and he'll move forward. There's only one fly for that ointment, and that is McCarthy put some far right members onto the Rules Committee, and he was able to get the rule for the floor debate only because Thomas Massey of Kentucky gave him that vote. And he's always in danger of not getting a rule. So that's incredibly embarrassing. That is, you get your negotiation on the Farm Bill and Defense Bill, and you got your Democrats and you're ready to go, and you can't get a rule to cover the floor debate. In these cases, the rule is no amendments. We're going to have an up or down vote on this. And that's what Thomas Massey of Kentucky did for McCarthy to get out of the Rules Committee by one vote. And he's a conservative guy too. What he did is he said, reminiscent of what we would all say, this isn't a spending bill. This is a pay your debts bill. What matters is the appropriations bills. So that's why Mitch might have helped with it too, but that's how McCarthy got the vote to go to the floor. That's what his danger is. They're not going to throw him out. They're going to complain bitterly. They're going to say he sold his caucus down the river. In terms of our perspective, I think all other things being equal, I mean, we like it when they're crazy and maniacal and try and tear down the government, but we still want to have one, right? We'd like to operate. And right now we don't have any choice but to be a little happy that McCarthy agrees with that. He's what Ross Douthat said in the Times is his secret power is he's an institutionalist. He doesn't want to be known as the speaker who can run the House. So that's my view of what happened. I think so far Hakeem Jeffries looks good as a suitable successor to Pelosi. I think progressives who think we should have flipped off the House Republicans, we didn't have that option. I don't see how we had that option because of the one thing that Biden was trying to avoid, markets crashing, driving us into recession. So all the wise, exciting ways to beat that racket by doing a coin or invoking the 14th Amendment are non-functional because the markets would crash before the court ruled on our interpretation of the 14th Amendment. As to issuing a coin, what do you think the markets would think about that? Oh, what a clever idea. We won't crash because they have $1 trillion coin. It wasn't going to happen. This is a time where it's useful to have a president who knows how to work with Congress. Mitch sat there on the side on purpose, and this was all certainly closely fought, but everybody who was fighting wanted to avoid a deficit. For Biden's purposes, he didn't get colossal, he didn't suffer any damage to his main legislative goals. Even on the $80 billion with the IRS, he took a cut, but we're still strongly expanding IRS enforcement. He didn't give any on the infrastructure package or the energy incentives. So I think he came out pretty close to home. Questions, thoughts on the debt package? Christina, you agree with all that?
Yeah, I was just listening though, I think yesterday morning, and it looked like the Freedom Caucus can still push a shutdown like next year. Is that correct? So they didn't get the debt ceiling, they didn't get the hostage, thing that they wanted, but they can still force a shutdown. Is that correct?
Not over the debt ceiling. Why?
Not over the debt ceiling. It would be a government shutdown.
Well, I mean, you could force a shutdown if you can say we refuse to pass the budget. But that would be silly. Melissa, you're turned off. So if you're commenting.
The government shutdown would only occur if they didn't pass a budget.
Yeah, so they could say that, but they couldn't do that. Then they'd never get the votes to not pass a budget with that slim of a majority. I think they're casting about, they're finding that McCarthy knows ways even with all he gave them, to try and have the House function. And remember, he's taking incoming from what passes for moderates, Nancy Mace and so forth. So McCarthy, I think he's acquitting himself. I'm not a fan of McCarthy's, and I'm not sure he believes in anything, but I do think it's nice to have a speaker that's allowing us to still function.
Although there's a lot of, deserve it, I think, praise for Biden for managing to do all the things he did. From a sort of general public political stance, it's pretty much just a buy, right? I mean, this doesn't really change it's like it never happened to the general public.
Well, I mean, in that we were, in Biden's view, we always had to pass those individual appropriations bills anyway. So he gets this debt ceiling increase. There's some new targets that the budget resolution establishes for the appropriations bills, but he was going to have those appropriations battles with the House anyway. So he does think that he didn't give up a lot. But he did give McCarthy an opportunity to say, well, this is the largest cut of anticipated spending in US history. So I don't think we should treat it as just a political win for us. And it never was, in Biden's view, that was never going to be possible once McCarthy passed the bill. So I think we did pretty well. I do think that I don't think we won independent voters. I think Trump lost them. Sure, we won some by Joe Biden appealing to blue collar voters more than Hillary would have, or something like that. But for the most part, Donald Trump won a whole bunch of blue collar voters and independent women voters from the suburbs in 2016 that he lost in 2020. So I never like to see somebody like McCarthy look somewhat normal, for fear that an independent voter somewhere will get sucked in by that and buy into what is really an agenda of the radical right. So I think that it's too bad that he did well, but it's not so bad for the country. It's just we should remember that with the next election cycle coming up, which is what I want to talk about next.
One thing on the debt limit is the Freedom Caucus may be getting McCarthy to do what they want for a change, because he came out and said no new funding for Ukraine.
Is that what he said?
Yeah.
Without qualification?
Without qualification.
Wow, that's surprising to me, because that's not going to happen. I mean,
That's what the Freedom Caucus would want, though. So I think that they have him by
the only times I've seen him say that he's qualified, basically he's been camping out in a careful examination front.
Yeah, I didn't hear him qualify it. I
Huh?
just heard him say no new funding for Ukraine.
It's really surprising it's like they're hell-bent to establish positions that 70% of Americans agree with. As long as we're careful in how we spend the money, and Zelensky continues to be Zelensky, American people want us to defend the Ukraine. And notice that Great Britain and Germany both have stepped up big time. So
yeah,
part of it is looking at who's going to give money next. Well, Biden could get new money for Ukraine anytime he needed to, and Mitch would join him in making sure it would happen, as would a majority of House Republicans. So I think we're still fine as long as it's Zelensky and as long as we have good resistance. I'm surprised that they picked that as an issue. It's certainly, and it was shocking that DeSantis did, even for a minute. That's bizarre. I don't think that's gonna, I think it's just another loser issue for them.
I don't think they'll succeed with it, but it's just an example of McCarthy giving in to the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah, I
Um,
think he's got to watch his flank with him, and that's probably what he was doing.
I have clarification there. So it's the supplemental spending package that McCarthy unconditionally said not going anywhere. He said that if Biden wants new money for Ukraine, it has to go through appropriations.
Yeah, okay, so that's a clarification.
Okay.
So here's what we need to talk about. We have 25 minutes left, and let's talk about I want to do a little bit on Senate, but with regard to the presidency and Republican candidates, all these people have been jumping in because they were anticipating that this indictment and other indictments would happen. So nobody's jumping in saying, I have to beat down Trump. Tim Scott's jumping in because he wants to be there as Trump falls. DeSantis, Nikki Haley, and so forth. And what's happening, as you can see, is Trump is far easier to wound. So all of a sudden, we have these epiphanies in June of 2023 that could have happened on January 7th of last year. Chris Christie says, guess what? Trump is lying. The election was settled, and he's making it sound like it was rigged. Chris Christie could have helpfully said that on January 7th. Nikki Haley all along could have criticized Trump for being a Putin apologist. And Pence comes out in his announcement that he's running for president and says, no president should ever urge a vice president to violate the Constitution. And if he ever does that, he shouldn't be elected to anything. Why Pence couldn't have said that on January 7th is a mystery. It seems to me that when Trump is wounded, that they're obviously less frightened of what he can do for them. And they're, again, all that language is to win either one lane or another lane. Lane number one, as you know, is the DeSantis lane. That's the same lane that Trump's in, and that's why they're fighting so hard. First, Trump doesn't like DeSantis. I mean, he likes Nikki Haley a lot more. He likes DeSantis, and that's why you're getting this amazing battle over the lane, where if Trump says, I did the wrong thing on COVID, DeSantis is going to say, I personally ripped the mask off 1,000 vulnerable senior citizens. I mean, DeSantis is trying to win that lane, and then he'll figure out what it has to do with other lanes. It doesn't give him all of MAGA. It just gives him a lane. And as I think I told you, Peggy Noonan said, this is a man who would turn off your life support to recharge your cell phone to recharge his cell phone. And that's who he is. He's punching Minnie Mouse with not much success. I think it's interesting to see the lane. So now you have the Trump DeSantis lane. So Tim Scott and Asa Hutchinson and Nikki Haley and Burgum, the governor of
North Dakota.
North Dakota, and the tech guy are all in that lane. They're all in the we're not to the right, we're to a little scoot on the other side of DeSantis. It's not just Asa Hutchinson, it's Tim Scott saying it was a legal election. Trump lost. So they're a little different than DeSantis. They're not quite as rabid. But there's only two of them that have any chance of being president of the United States of all these folks, Nikki Haley and Tim Scott. These are not huge chances, but they're realistic candidates. Asa Hutchinson obviously is not going to be president. Neither is Chris Christie. In fact, Chris Christie is in a lane by all himself. He's in the attack mode lane. He took so much shit from Donald Trump for so many years, including fat shaming and all those things. This is revenge time, and he's good at it. So fine with me. He can say the truth about Trump that he could have said all along, that he knew all along, and that would be good. So that's what the lanes are. And I don't think I think what we need to remember is there is, as I said in my blog last week, there's someone else in the wings, and he's from Virginia, and he's the one that beat Terry McAuliffe, and he's the governor, Glenn Youngkin. He's former corporate hedge fund manager or investment fund manager. He's not a moderate by any standard, but he's working on education beyond banning books and telling teachers. He's not banning books and telling teachers what not to say. He's working on education, catching up reading levels to pre-COVID. He's sitting there, he's rich, and he is waiting to offer himself if DeSantis continues to decline and no one else gets traction. So that's my view of the Republicans. I think they all jumped in because they thought Trump would recede. It will not happen immediately, but there'll be 2 indictments after this. And eventually, they're not going to let him have the nomination. I said inaccurately on this site that all the Republican primaries are winner take all. That's how Trump won in 2016. Not all of them are. Some of them are proportionate distribution, but it's easy to work up a quick lead on the Republican side if you get 30% of the vote, say in New Hampshire, and there's 8 other candidates that split the other 70%, you win all the delegates. However, what the media will do will compare it to Trump's levels from previous year, from 2020, and eventually Trump will recede. It'll take a long time, which is to our advantage. Questions, thoughts on how we're handicapping these candidates? So even in the face of these Warren candidates, we could, in the face of all this storm, we could start thinking that we couldn't lose. And especially since we're on the right side of guns and choice, monumentally, the last 2 elections we benefited greatly from on choice this last time, just hugely. Both houses of Michigan legislature, Democratic governor in Kansas, and so forth. Every time there's an initiative on choice, we're going to win, and there's going to be an initiative in Ohio next year, looks like, or this year. So how could we possibly lose? We could lose if the economy starts to falter big time or inflation goes back up, but the Fed's not going to do that. We could lose if DeSantis gets traction on the woke wars, but Trump himself says he doesn't think people even know what it means. I just think Disney's the wrong target, and there's no traction for. I just don't see independent voters coming out on, we're right on the economy, right on abortion choice, and all of a sudden we're going to lose because somebody wants to ban a book in Jacksonville, Florida, or disrespect a gay 16-year-old. I just don't see it. So we could lose if immigration is in the news every day. And notice that at least temporarily, has calmed down Biden's new rules. So I think there's one monumentally way that we're more likely to lose than any other way by a lot. And that is by nominating a candidate in the summer who has a stroke or a heart attack in September. I just think we're putting ourselves at huge risk if Joe Biden is our candidate. I think the sandbag fall is the least of it. We all know, unfortunately, all of us on this call are over 60, or most of us, and we know what aging does to a body and a mind. And the idea that our candidate for the president of the United States is going to be 82 years old when he runs is not a wise thing. And Americans have already said that. We can't sneak up on them on this issue. I got a note from a Democratic supporter saying I'm wrong to raise it because the Republicans are going to take advantage. They're going to know. We can't sneak up on them. They know how old Joe Biden is. They don't need me to tell them. So this is what's going to happen. Reed is not so sure. You remember when we ran Joe Biden, he was barely in the lead, and all of a sudden, Amy Klobuchar and other candidates were falling by the wayside for Super Tuesday, and everybody was for Joe Biden after he won in South Carolina, which we don't even win in November. And all of a sudden, Biden is that was an engineered coming together. And behind the engineering, besides Joe Biden, was the president who was president before Joe Biden. And I just can't believe that Democratic leadership isn't going to get together with Joe and do something, because I think the voters are already telling us, including Democratic voters, that they don't want Joe to run. So I'm still on my soapbox. I think Joe's not running. I think something's going to happen between now and next year, which means he won't run. And I think the break the glass candidate is not on your emergency to break the glass candidate is not a present cabinet secretary named Buttigieg. It's not the current vice president, who's, and it's not a senator like Cory Booker. It's yet again a possible governor, and I'm going for
So it's Glenn Youngkin versus Gretchen Whitmer.
Or JP Pritzker. I think we have to go generational. It's got to be somebody under 60, and it's helpful to have it be a governor because Congress is in such disrepute. And I think Biden's out of there I think right now it's an advantage for him to be in there. It won't be over time. I think by fall, the wheels have got to start turning. And I do not believe Joe Biden's going to be the candidate. Comments and questions on this map?
I don't see how any other Democrat could beat the Republican, especially if it's Trump. I know you don't think it'll be Trump. I still think there's a chance, but time will tell. But I don't see anybody but Biden winning.
Why is that? Why are you thinking that, Melissa?
Because nobody else has as much name exposure, except maybe Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom. I don't think there's enough time if we wait until the fall or the winter to put up another candidate.
Well, it's scary for sure, but
I think you'd be
at
taking
this time in 1960, nobody knew. In 1959, nobody who knew who Jack Kennedy was. And actually, Obama
or Obama, yeah,
was pretty late too.
yeah.
I'm not saying it's such a glorious situation, but remember, if it's not Trump, you got DeSantis with high negatives, and Glenn Youngkin doesn't have any bigger following right now than Whitmer does. I think you define your candidate then. You better know how to do it, but you define your candidate. I agree that we're at risk, but I think there have been maggots along with Trump. I think they're at risk too. I don't think they necessarily have a candidate with an automatic national following. And remember, all this time, two things have happened. People who claim themselves as Republicans have decreased, and we continue to get a demographic advantage from ethnicity advantage from Latinos in particular, and and independents. We won by 7 million votes. That was I agree that was because it was Joe Biden. But
I think, if Biden is the nominee, people say they want somebody other than him, but if he is the nominee, they'll still vote for him, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's too big of a risk. When 70% of Democrats say they don't want Joe Biden to run, I think it's too big of a risk. I agree that right now Joe Biden's saying, well, sure, but you're still going to vote for me. But I don't want to take that risk. And they're not going to vote for him if he falls over in August. I mean, I'm 75, and I promise you, if nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. I just couldn't fly overnight to Thailand for negotiations. Then they'd have to make me go to the meeting. And this is a non-trivial thing. He's too old to be president. It's a big country. It's a world leadership. He does not have the juice to do it. He's
But
done
he's
very
been
well.
doing it. He's been doing it just fine.
I think every time you see Joe, you can see him.
I know, he's starting to shuffle.
He
a
would have
little-
been an infinitely better president. He's a good president, absolutely, I agree. I'm not talking about whether he's a good president now. I'm talking about whether we can sell him as a good president for 2 years from now.
Yeah,
I think we're at risk. Other comments on, anybody want to disagree with me and anybody
Well,
else?
Cynthia had her hand up.
Or her fist?
Hey, I just, Gavin Newsom's name come up. Why would he not be a good candidate? And would there be a strategy to pick a vice president who can easily step into Joe Biden's empty chair if should a terrible thing like that happen?
No, I think there's nothing to that. He's not going to walk away from Kamala Harris. That would create such discord. She wouldn't leave voluntarily. So I don't think, say, switching from her to Gretchen Whitmer or something, but I don't think that's any chance of that happening. What was the first part of your question?
Gavin Newsom.
Oh, yeah, I think, Richard Nixon was from California, as you know.
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. California needs something new now, and I don't think running a California Democrat helps us in swing states.
I think, my opinion, I think Newsom has a reputation, has been made to seem like he's so far to the left, he could never serve the country. I mean, everybody points to California as a liberal bastion of wokeness.
Yeah. And I think he's made, he made little mistakes during the COVID, but I just think we're having issues with blue collar Democratic voters, and why not go with someone who just got a ton of them in Michigan
Yeah,
or in Illinois?
I agree. Whitmer would be a really good choice.
Yeah, you
I
run a
just-
woman, independent, run choice, age. So let's move on to our last topic, which is the Senate.
Mm,
As you can see, we've got a lot of issues today. We don't necessarily all feel that we're on the same page. And Reed called me out when I first said Joe wasn't going to be the nominee 6 or 8 months ago. We'll see, but I haven't seen anything that will change my mind. And to this point, it's to our advantage for him to be president, not be lame ducked, to handle these negotiations, and to not have 10 announced candidates. But at some point around fall or so, it will become our disadvantage because they won't have raised money or gotten organized. These people are thinking about how they would do it. But at this point, it's still our advantage to have these awful battles and indictments on the Republican side and have somebody being presidential on our side. So meanwhile, there's a decent chance we could take back the House a year from now. If we're having a good national race for president, and there's a bigger chance that we'll lose the Senate, then we'll lose the House, weirdly. And that's because in the 34 races that are up, 23 of those are Democratic seats. And that's because, as you know, we did so well in 2018 because it was 2 years after Trump, after Comey and the Russians and Trump won, and also we had done well in 2012 when Obama beat Mitt Romney. So that's why we hold so many of those seats, and we hold a few of them in places that Trump won, quite notably in Montana, where John Chester's likely to run again, and in West Virginia, where Cynthia Schick's favorite Joe Manchin is likely to run again. So these are the seats that we would have to hold. Say we lost the presidency, then we can't break the tie with the vice president, so we can't lose any seats. if we win the presidency, we could lose one seat because we could break the tie. These are the seats at risk. Joe Manchin in West Virginia, John Tester in Montana, Sherrod Brown in Ohio with our candidate just losing, Arizona, where Kristen Sinema is now threatening to run as an independent. Jackie Brown in Nevada, they always have close races. Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, and two others there. Bob Casey in Pennsylvania and the open seat in Michigan. So I could say we could win all those seats. So all the Politico and all the New York Times, oh, there's 8 seats at risk and they're all Democratic seats and Mayday, Mayday. We could win all those seats. We'd have to have a good national candidate for president. But you don't think any of those are automatic losses. The one that's his biggest worry is Arizona. If Kristen Sinema runs as an independent, Ruben Gallego runs as the Democrat, we could lose to a 40% Republican and lose our advantage there. But the other folks, we're going to win in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Those are blue states that were just temporarily put into jeopardy. We're going to win in Wisconsin. Tammy Baldwin's not going to lose. So you have to worry about Nevada. You have to worry about Arizona. I guess you have to worry about John Tester. I wouldn't bet against John Tester. I mean, he knows how to run in Montana. So it's conceivable that we could protect all those seats. But if you are a betting person, you might bet that we could lose 2 of them, in which case we lose the Senate unless we took back a seat somewhere. And that's where the pundits are worried about us, because they can't identify anything that Republicans presently hold that they think we could win. So Politico came up with us beating Rick Scott in Florida. I don't know who's going to do that. I don't buy into just there being a huge Florida Republican advantage, except temporarily. Charlie Crist, who DeSantis massacred, was a spent politician.
Yeah.
If he had let the Democrat who was agriculture commissioner run, DeSantis wouldn't have massacred her. But I don't know that we're going to beat Rick Scott. So we could try and beat Josh Hawley and Missouri. There's an open seat in Indiana, home of Birch Pie. We used to have that seat. So the number one favorite lately is that Colin Allred or somebody could beat Ted Cruz in Texas.
Yeah, that's what.
So that would be interesting. I wouldn't discount that. Allred's got a lot of money. He's a former football player, which is always handy. And so if anybody can say, oh, sure, Beto lost here, but I've never been beaten by anyone. And Ted Cruz is, a hat sitting on a pair of shoes. So it's possible, but you wouldn't want to predict it. So that's where we stand in the Senate. That's why you could argue that we're in a little bit more trouble in the Senate than we are in the House. And that's my story of today. Comments on the Senate?
I think Ted Cruz is pretty weak. I think Colin Allred could do a good job against him. Nobody likes Ted Cruz, even his constituents, I have to imagine.
Yeah, and remember, Beto was seen by many as an reconstructed liberal, and he was only lost by 3. And
he'll never recover from the "I'll take everybody's guns" comment.
Yeah, I think that turned out to not be a good thing to say.
I think Joe Manchin is the weakest. And I've also heard rumors that he's going to run as presidential candidate on the No Labels Party.
They're talking about that. I think that would, I don't think Joe Manchin wants a right winger to be president. So
I hope we wouldn't divide it like that. The No Label Party scares me a little bit with their.
Well, of course, we're victimized by, we're still remembering Ralph Nader and in the election to Junior Bush. I think it's hard to have a no labels party draw as much from Republicans as Democrats, given the present state of the Republican Party. So I'd be worried about any no labels candidates, even if I liked the candidates. I
Yeah.
think Joe Biden, I think Joe Manchin likes being the swing vote in the Senate. I think he anticipates that one way or another, he'll be a power broker in the Senate. And I think he can beat Jim Justice. I think he's his own persona, and that's, who knows, but he could run against Jim Justice is going to run against him and could beat him for sure. Joe, that's why Joe Biden helps hand Joe Manchin victories on
Yeah, he gave him that,
energy
he
issues.
gave him the pipeline and
That's
it-
right. They were aware that that was a swing district, so.
yeah. I also feel pretty confident about Arizona. I think that by switching to independent, Kristen Sinema angered enough of the voters that they're not going to switch to an independent just to vote for her.
But couldn't she detract more
Vote?
from
I don't
our
think-
side?
I don't think she'd get that many votes, enough votes to be a spoiler. I really don't.
No, so that would be the risk. And of course, Nevada, we always win or lose by 118 votes, so that would be another.
Has Arizona announced a Republican candidate yet?
I don't know if they have. I looked today at some of these other races. Indiana is interesting because that's a way right winger. So you could argue that we could play the middle in Indiana, although political doesn't think that's going to work. In the olden days, as you know, we had Tom Daschle was from South Dakota. At one time, we had a Democrat from North Dakota. So we were present in all these states. Eagleton was from Missouri. We've won in a lot of these states. Mike Mansfield from Montana. So we'll see whether we can play these states. The idea that we're in trouble in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, I think it's false. I don't see.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
Well, it's good to hear everybody's thinking. We'll find out on Joe Biden, but I think we're all on the same page with regard to this being a dark day for America when the president of the United States, former president, is indicted. And if ever something was avoidable by a conscious, sentient human being, it was this. He had to be the biggest fool ever, not ever, almost ever, to indulge in a series of easily discoverable activities that would give Jack Smith no choice but to indict him. That's what the newspaper should be saying. You read those 43 pages and you think, what was he thinking? Let's randomly move boxes all over the place. Let's lie to people about it. Let's show some records to people. Let's lie about that. Let's admit that they're classified and then say we can automatically declassify them. And then let's call it a witch hunt and see how that plays. And what it plays is, this is when you turn yourself into federal authorities. Is the answer to all of that.
Well, we'll be a much different world the next time we meet, as we always are. I've asked you if you can come, David, on July the 14th, which is the second Friday, and you said you could. So we're going to meet. We're going to meet then on the second Friday of July next. Thank you so much,
see you
all of
then.
you.
Thanks a lot.